Hey guys, welcome to a bit of a different video on the channel. My channel is obviously in general dedicated to the video game FIFA, helping guys improve at that. Lots of different content built around FIFA. But naturally, FIFA is a football game, and as a content creator who's put my career and a lot of my life into FIFA, I'm passionate about football. And I think anyone who's passionate about football and cares about football will have deep interest and just wonder about the European Super League that has been talked about a lot today. It'd been going over social media earlier today. Lots of football pundits, journalists had started talking about it. Now, major news outlets have basically confirmed it is definitely a thing. We've heard about this breakaway major European Super League for years, like nearly a decade, I would say, maybe even longer. There's been talk of it happening, and UEFA have always said, "Oh, there's no chance of that." A lot of the big clubs said they've never had any interest in that. Surprise, surprise, they've been lying. The talks have been going on probably for a long time now because there's no way they're announcing it basically now and let that they're letting it leak out now. There's no way that they'd be doing that if they hadn't been preparing for it for years, and the potential I don't know what the term would be, but basically the potential damage it can do and what's going to happen with it. This video, I'm going to basically be discussing the European Super League, the consequences that it could have, and basically why I think the European Super League is bad for football, and put my argument forward and just general discussion around it. If you like these type of videos, please let me know. I'd be up for doing more football discussions on the channel, but obviously I need to know if you guys enjoy that. First of all, football at its heart is about the fans. The last year in general has shown this, in my opinion, with the global pandemic of coronavirus, COVID. Football's not been the same without fans at the stadiums. Players say this all the time, clubs say this. Fans are what made football, and we'll talk about that more as the video goes on, but football should be about the fans. Teams like Man U and Arsenal were founded by, look at Arsenal. Arsenal were founded in Woolwich by munition workers at a factory, hence they're called the Gunners. Man U were founded by a carriage and wagon department at Yorkshire and Lancashire Railway in Newton Heath in 1878. These teams weren't founded by billionaire owners. These teams have rich history and tradition, as do hundreds of other English clubs, never mind all the other clubs in different nations. Fans made these clubs what they are. These clubs haven't become multi-billion-pound organisations because rich owners have suddenly invested in them and seen a business opportunity. Fans made football what it is today, the biggest game in the well, biggest sport in the world, the beautiful game as we call it. And if this European Super League happens, just for the club fans of the big clubs who are going to be in it, how are they going to be able to afford to keep up with their teams and attend games? How can they travel across Europe for half the games every season? Obviously, half your games are going to be at home, but in the Champions League, it's already going to be quite expensive for a lot of these fans, and it already pushes them out. But if there's going to be 12 teams, I think it'd probably be a 36 game to even 48 game season, probably 48 games. No. If there's 12 teams, there'd be 11 games you play. It'd probably be 44 games because you wouldn't have Champions League. If you're playing 44 games a season, 22 of those away, how many fans can actually keep up with that and afford to do that? Like I say, fans make football clubs, and I really feel football has become more and more a business in the last few decades as more money's poured into it. And when money gets involved in something, people start to take notice. Look at video games, for example. Video games now, microtransactions, the endless greed in them. Games aren't released in a full state. They release numerous amounts of DLC, like I say, microtransactions. Video games now are made and rushed out to make lots of money for companies because now video games are making so much money that investors have seen this, and video games are no longer made by people who love video games all the time. There might be the people who work on the actual games probably do love video games, but the people at the top who are making the decisions tend to just be investors who just want to make a lot of money out of it, and video games have suffered for that in a lot of ways. And I feel like football, this is happening in football now. Football was originally dominated in its like the origins of football. It's probably been around for a few centuries, but when football really started to take hold was probably the mid to late 1800s. It was dominated originally by Etonian elites. By that I mean people went to Eton, some of the old posh universities English football, and they won the FA Cup a lot in its original state. If you've not watched the English Game, which is on Netflix, I'd definitely recommend that. Really good series about like the origins of football and how it became the working man's game, which football's been known as for a long time. They started to go away from like the elite university, rich people who could afford to play it and train, to becoming a working man's game, and that's the way football had been for over a century. Working man can probably barely afford to support the teams now. To buy a brand new football shirt can cost £80 or £90. Never mind all the other merchandise that's a rip-off that they throw at you. To attend a game in England is an absolute rip-off. It can be £50, £60. Season tickets at some of these football clubs are over £1,000. And that's just sometimes just to get on a waiting list. I understand that there's so much demand for them and supply and demand in economics. I do get that. In England, it's even worse. The amount it costs to watch football on BT, on Sky, all these different things. Germany has a much better model, and we'll get to Germany later on. It's interesting that Germany and the German clubs are not wanting right now to be involved in this European Super League. These football clubs also, a lot of them are at the heart of their communities and had been for a long time. And these big football clubs still preach that they're all about the communities. They do lots of outreach work, charity stuff. But do they actually care about their communities and the fans that built these clubs to what they are now? I don't think these owners do. I think they just care about the money that they can make in these teams. Aston Villa really suffered under its previous owner, Randy Lerner. He basically put a little bit of money in the club, he bought the club at a cheaper price. I think he just hoped that Villa would be able to get European football by not investing a lot, realised it wasn't going to work, and then he tried to sell the club at triple the price that he paid for it just to make money out of Aston Villa. Didn't manage to sell it, let us suffer, and Aston Villa, one of the probably top 10 teams in English football and have a rich history, team I support, ended up getting relegated to the Championship and really struggled and were in a lot of financial issues because of a rich owner who just wanted to make money out of the club. There's hundreds of stories like this all across the world in football nowadays with how this is happening to clubs and rich owners just not looking after the clubs and not caring about over a century of history and traditions that a lot of these clubs have. Do fans want the European Super League? Fans want to see the best teams play the best. It's one of the reasons we all love the Champions League. There's issues with it, and I think UEFA are talking about revamping it in different ways. But it's cool to see the best teams in England go and play the best teams in Europe. It's why the Champions League is probably, in club football, the most prestigious tournament. But do we want to see a European Super League where the best teams in England suddenly aren't playing in England anymore? I don't think so. German clubs have a rule where the clubs have to be at least 51% owned by the fans. So that basically stops rich private investors taking over the clubs and making them into big businesses like a lot of other clubs are doing. And it's interesting to see that no German clubs are involved in the proposals for this European Super League. Why? Because the fan-owned clubs like Bayern Munich and Dortmund will reject this because fans don't want this. Fans don't want to be a part of this. And like I say, fans are what make football clubs. And fans clearly don't want to be a part of this. There might be some fans who do, but I've not seen an argument yet today where I've seen people actually backing it. The only argument I can see is that these rich clubs just want to become richer and make more money for their owners. For me, football is the beautiful game. It's the world's biggest sport because of the fans. The grassroots level all the way to the top should be what you're able to do. I don't like this idea of a franchise system. I think it does work. Like I've got a Green Bay Packers top. I think it works in American sports with the college system and how they do it over there. But I don't think for football it does work or would work even. And a European Super League, these big teams are not going to risk joining it if there's any risk that they could get taken out of it. They're just not going to do that and all the investment that it's going to take. The idea that teams can get promoted to the top leagues in their country and potentially go play in Europe against the very best is what makes them so. It makes football like the dream, I guess. Like, look at what Leicester did a few years ago in the Premier League. If the best teams in the major European leagues suddenly aren't in it anymore, what's the point in the English league? If it's between Aston Villa, West Ham, Leeds, Leicester, Everton, teams like this, it's just not the same if you know all the best teams in your league aren't even in it anymore. Would there be relegation in the European Super League? Like I say, probably not. What happens to smaller nations, maybe teams like from Romania, Czech Republic, Bulgaria, Denmark, all these other nations where they still have some big clubs that are popular in those nations, but how are they? What European football can they have? What's the dream end goal for them? The ramifications this can have on the rest of European football as a whole, is massive, and I think it could really damage football. At the moment, what is really that wrong with the current system that hurts clubs? There are issues with UEFA and FIFA, of course. There's a lot of corruption. But for me, the main issue for these big clubs wanting to be part of the European Super League is they just want to make more money. It doesn't help the fans who love the clubs. It's just about making more money for the owners. I feel like there's been a lot of issues in the last decade with financial fair play. UEFA preached it was about looking after football and big football clubs. But let's be honest, it wasn't really. It was about trying to keep the big clubs big, which is repeating here with the European Super League. It was trying to stop smaller clubs from being able to invest lots of money and get into this. Also, why are Man City, a team who for 30, 40 years in English football didn't do a lot, suddenly getting into a league with the major teams just because they spent a lot of money? Like, that's a separate point in itself. But Man City, I think the last time they were a pretty big club, maybe in the 1970s, maybe 60s, I think it's probably 70s though, didn't do anything in English football for years. They were in the lower division, spent a load of money. Now they're suddenly one of the world's biggest teams and get to basically decide the fate of English football, European football. That type of thing just doesn't sit right with me. I'm just reading my notes. I mean, yeah, what happens to the smaller clubs? And why smaller clubs? Like, there's a lot of big clubs who wouldn't be necessarily in these proposals. But like a team like AC Milan haven't done anything in the Champions League for years. They've failed on a lot of levels. They're obviously historically one of the biggest clubs in Europe. I think they've won the second most Champions Leagues or European Cups. Of course they want to be a part of this because they've been failing for years. They just want to get a seat back at the top of the table. I don't think teams that have either spent lots recently, like Man City, to suddenly become a top team, or spent lots historically and the fans have helped them get to where they are, should suddenly be able to screw over the rest of football just for make more money for their rich owners. Of course, as well, will the players be up for this? Will players want to be a part of this? UEFA have come out with statements saying that they're strongly against this. FIFA are saying the same. The major leagues like La Liga, Premier League, all these are saying that. Of course, they're going to be saying that because they're worried that they're going to lose their big teams. That, like the Premier League, get billions of pounds in TV revenue that's split amongst teams, but they make a lot of money, the Premier League, and the people at the top of that. They're very scared about this happening, of course, but they're obviously condemning it. The FIFA are saying that players will be banned from playing international. Will players care about that? It's going to be interesting to see, because what will happen in this European Super League if it goes ahead? It will only go ahead if it's going to make the clubs a lot more money. And if the clubs are making a lot more money, you can guarantee that the players and their agents, who are very greedy, are going to be asking for a lot more money. I think a lot of players would be very interested, very, very interested in playing in this European Super League if they're going to get double, triple the salaries that they currently get. And you could somewhat understand that. It'd be interesting to see what players say about this. Do players care that much about international football anymore? Some maybe do, some maybe don't. A lot of players don't even earn money from international football anymore because they give it to charities. It's just naturally what the players do. It's like seen as an unwritten rule at these clubs. I think now modern football, with players making so much money, a lot of them live in a bit of an alternate reality anyway, where they just don't really care or understand about the average football fan. Story I remember a few years ago, Joleon Lescott, who actually grew up an Aston Villa fan, was playing for Aston Villa on a king's ransom wage, basically played awful for us. He was near the end of his career, he wasn't as good anymore, so I understand that. But he just looked like he didn't give a shit. He just looked like he didn't care anymore about playing for Aston Villa, even though he was supposed to be a fan. We lost the game. We were having an awful season, going to get relegated. Fans were giving him stick, and honestly, rightfully so. He just wasn't trying, it looked. And then he tweeted a picture of his really expensive, I think it was Mercedes or something like that. Basically, 2 fingers to the fans saying, I don't care, I've got a load of money. And then didn't apologise for it. Said it was an accident and it was a pocket tweet. So just that one there was just a great example of how so many players are just out of touch with fans and the real world. I saw Gary Neville's rant earlier on Sky Sports about it. I totally agreed with that. It's just this European Super League obviously is just about money, and in the day and age that we're in, where we've just had a global pandemic and so many have suffered, and all these owners want to do is just make more money for themselves, these billionaire rich owners, it's crazy to me. And I really hope that this doesn't go ahead. I've not really seen any positives yet for fans and football in general. For me, it's shocking, but it doesn't surprise me. I'd be interested to see what you guys think about this. There's lots more I could say about this. Maybe I could get a few more football content creators to talk with me about this and have a little podcast type thing about it. But hopefully you guys have enjoyed this. I appreciate you guys' support on this channel. Let me know your thoughts on this. As always, keep it spicy.